Hello, St. John Baptist Church. This is Brother Al McClaney again with the weekly stewardship video. I want to start off this week's video with a backdrop of what we're dealing with in the country, not just the coronavirus, as we know that's been going on since the middle of March and the stay home orders, but I also want to talk about the injustice protests that we're seeing, the news regarding George Floyd. And we know in the African American community, this is just a continuation of Breonna Taylor, Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, and we can all even go all the way back to Rodney King. So I want to show how stewardship intersects from a standpoint of a stewardship of influence intersecting with biblical financial stewardship. And in the end, you'll see I've got a summation of like a call to action. So let me start sharing my screen. And I'm going to use, starting off, the backdrop of Joseph. And you can see the scripture I'm using is Genesis 39 verses 1 through 2. And I encourage you later in your quiet time to read Genesis chapters 37 through 50, gives you the whole chronological history of Joseph. But I'll start off with 39, 1 and 2, and most of the scriptures I'm using is from the Amplified. Now, Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the royal guard, brought him from the Ishmaelites, meaning he literally bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and even though a slave became a successful and prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. So I underline that to see later on in verse 41 how Joseph went from being a slave, and literally when they would buy the slaves, they would sit there with their clothes on like a pedestal or stand, and they would be bid on, and that's all Joseph had from the natural eye. But we can see in the scripture in verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph. And it says, even though a slave, he became a successful and prosperous man. So we start off and foundationally, we said in any stewardship, recognition that as Christians, we have the Lord with us, and that he is our foundation, and he is the owner, and we're the stewards. So we talked about the intersection of our stewardship of influence and the biblical stewardship over our finances. And later on, we see in Genesis chapter 41 through 44, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I've set you in charge over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took off a signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand and dressed him in official vestments of fine linen. And then we go down to verse 44. It says, moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, though I am Pharaoh, yet without your permission shall no man raise his hand to do anything or set his foot to go anywhere in all the land of Egypt. All classes of people shall submit to your authority. So I did a little deeper dive, and I said, I submit to you that the Lord being with Joseph is the most important factor, and that is for us as Christians. But Joseph also yielded to the Lord when it came to his word. And if you go back and read, as I said in your quiet time, Pharaoh had a problem. He couldn't interpret dreams. And so the Lord had vested Joseph with the ability to interpret that dream. And it ended up being a financial dream. So I said part of the backdrop was going to be the issues of what we're going in the background with the protests and dealing with social injustice, police brutality. But I also, during this time, want to look at two facets, which is investing opportunities, and then in the middle of chaos lies opportunity. So let's go to Genesis 41, verse 34. So here is the financial vision that Pharaoh received from Joseph. Verse 34, let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take a fifth of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. So this vision Joseph received from the Lord, and he provided that consultation, Joseph, to Pharaoh. And what was the end result? We saw the final end result is he was second in command of Egypt. But before then, because he came up with the consultation advice for Pharaoh, Pharaoh put him in charge. So in verse 39 it says, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. So from a tough situation, God can speak to us. And right now, we've got COVID, we've got injustice, racism in the middle of COVID going on, and we are stewarding still an opportunity to steward our finances for opportunity and use that opportunity and finances to steward influence. So I took a look and said, what are 2 questions we may need to ask ourselves? Ask yourself these questions. Where are there areas to add to God's kingdom? And how can I add to God's kingdom? And it goes back to stewarding our finances and our influence. And I looked at scripture, because scripture always provides the answer. And our master Jesus models to us, found in Luke 4:18, Amplified Bible. And this is what Jesus said. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, the Messiah, because he has anointed me to preach the good news to the poor. He has sent me to announce release, pardon, forgiveness to the captives, and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, downtrodden, bruised, and crushed by tragedy. So we can see that Jesus models for us that we as Christians should be stewarding our influence, stewarding our finances, and they can intersect when it comes to setting those who are oppressed free, the downtrodden, the bruised, crushed by tragedy. Those dealing with injustice is what we're seeing right now. So we can be involved in that. And as I was preparing for this video, I went back and I started looking at some of the speeches of Dr. Martin Luther King, and the speech and what in the city of Memphis and what he was dealing with. He had started transitioning for just not civil rights, but now we're talking about equality when it comes to economic rights. And that is what it was all about in Memphis. So with that, I want us, and I'm gonna give us a summation at the end of a call to action. So I want to look for opportunities. So as our finances get better as a people, and as our stewarding of those finances get better, we can use that to intersect over to our area of influence. Because while protests are great, at a certain point, as we've seen before, we can go back to the Rodney King, the protests sometimes are weighing down. But what will continue is our ability to project that economic power. So during this chaos of COVID, I mentioned to you, there's still some particular trades or stocks and investments that are still doing well. And this will be a good time to remind, even though on the last slide I have the disclaimer, remember, this is not to act as a specific recommendation, because you're seeing all types of companies listed here on this heat map, but this is for education information purposes only. You'll see it on the last slide, but I want to emphasize that again. Check with your licensed financial advisor if you have one, or do your own research. So here, this is a heat map, and this is a resource that I encourage you to use. It's out on finviz.com, so finviz.com, and you go to map, and you'll see you can pick different time frames. And this time frame I did was year to date. So the larger the square and the brighter the color green, the more profitable it's been for the year. So you can see leading the way was Amazon. Makes sense. People sitting at home ordering things, and Amazon has been a beast when it comes to investments through the years anyway. You can see Microsoft out here. You can see Apple. So you may be looking at these and saying, well, how do you know? Some of them are intuitive. You can see Google, the FB, you can guess Facebook, but some of them are not so much. What you can do is, if you go out to this heat map, if you hover over that particular, and those are called stock symbols, you can see what company it is. And I've taken a screenshot of that, and this is what it looks like. So if I was hovering over HD, it'll pull up the companies that are in this particular grid. In this case is consumer cyclical, home improvement, retail. And you see when I hovered over HD, it brings up Home Depot Incorporated, what it's currently trading at, that's the price, and how much up or down it is for the year. And also in there, and I just happen to know that's low, but it brings up the two that are in that particular grid. And if I hovered over low, and it won't work here because this is a screenshot, it would give the same information. And you can go and click further down in there and get more specific information regarding that company. So this could act as a place to look for particular opportunities. And you can see maybe ones you want to steer away from right now. That's actually Berkshire Hathaway is actually down for the year. That's United Healthcare. You can see it's up 6.8%. This is Visa. I cut off the percentage up, but if you were out on this website, it would show you that it's up. So if it's green, it's up. If it tends to be more of a kind of purple or red color, it's down or like close to break even. And then you can see the larger the box, the more it will push, or if you will, influence the Standard & Poor's 500. So that's a great resource. Now here's one, the heat map representing the exchange traded funds. And remember, we use those, and those will be the last two slides I show with graphs on it. We've been using the QQQ and the SPY. And remember, QQQ represents technology, and the SPY is the S&P 500. And you can see the SPY is about to break even for the year, come back. QQQ is now up for the year. And I'll show you that in the graph or the chart that we always take a look at. This is a great resource, as I said. So here's the chart that you're used to looking at by now. And SPY, Standard & Poor's, has gone well past those two levels we've been watching. So it's past the 50% retracement and the 61.8%. So that was the high for the year. And notice we're close to coming back to the high for the year. So I always encourage caution, but it looks like we may actually be coming out of this thing from a market standpoint. But we know that there's still job information that's not as favorable out there. But even though the market got a surprise on Friday where 2.5 million jobs were created versus loss, that surprised the market. And you can see on Friday, that represents Friday, it was a nice push up. Now, QQQ has gone past its historic profitability mark. You can see it's now past where we were at the beginning of the year, which was a record. So well past the 61.8%, now past the record for the year. And you saw when we looked at that heat map, it was up 12% for the year. That's a pretty remarkable recovery. So those represent opportunities for you. So let's look at a call to action, a summation at the end here. So I talked about the intersection between stewardship financially and stewardship of influence. So we as Christians, we want to be involved in all areas and increasing our influence in all areas. And you can see this picture here represents probably my hometown. It probably was Birmingham, Alabama, or Montgomery, where the fire hoses back in the 60s. Now, what was being marched and protested about, some of it has changed, but the overall inequality and economic inequality still exists. But we have something that we didn't have in the 60s. First, we have the right to vote. And then we have economic power, and I'll point that out when we get down here to number 5. So here's the call to action. Continue to pray and listen to the voice of God, because that's going to be important when it comes to cultivating our biblical stewardship principles, which not only includes economic, but our stewardship of influence. Complete the 2020 census. This is so important because that's how that's the data that's used for funding for departments, for government agencies, for programs, even when it comes to redistricting and drawing the voter maps. We not only want you, number 4, to register to vote if you haven't registered, but also get out and vote in all elections, not just national elections, but so much policy is made at the local level. All elections, we need to be weighing in on and using our stewardship of influence. And then finally, and this is not a complete list, but these are the things I thought of, let your voice be heard. So support peaceful protests, not looting, not violence, but support peaceful protests. That's so powerful. Write our political leaders. I know writing letters anymore is not in vogue, but those leaders are looking at the pulse through what type of feedback they're getting. And some of them made it so easy where you can send them an email. Then we want to financially support organizations. And that's where that intersection is coming in again, that broke folks can't help organizations. So the better we are financially, the more we can use our economic power to be a voice of change. So we want to financially support organizations that are fighting for justice, organizations that agree with your viewpoint, organizations, whether it be political organizations or nonprofit organizations. One thing to remember, as African Americans, we control close to $2 trillion in buying power. Where is that focused? That's up to us. So that's when we want to do our research and be involved. And that buying power can be increasing the more we cultivate good biblical stewardship principles. So again, I'll end disclaimer, no stocks or trades or strategies are meant as a financial recommendation. This is for education and information purposes only. We'll see you next week, St. John. And so in the meantime, let's take action. Let's still stay safe because there is a pandemic still going on. And we want to make sure that we're praying and acting on the prayers and what the Lord is given to us as purpose and what we should be doing.